Chapter 1 is over the professional garde-manger kitchen, history and where we at, where we've been, where we're going, and finally some different key attributes that we look for as far as a professional. So looking at the term garde-manger, what does it mean? Well, the literal term of garde-manger means keep to eat or keeping to eat. That's the literal translation. The garde-manger originally was the pantry or the cold storage. And the person in charge of that cold storage in French is the officer de bouche. Interestingly enough, the officer de bouche translates to officer of the mouth. And that person was responsible for managing the storeroom during the Middle Ages. When we look at a big part of garde manger, at least historically, was the food preservation. And we find that when we look at the historical significance of food being preserved, most of it was by accident. For example, the first fish that was preserved was probably done by accident. The fish had come in on the high tide. The tide came down. They got stuck in a little pool of water. The seawater evaporated in the sun and it dried up the fish, but the salt that was in the water got pulled into the fish, and you ended up with this dried out fish that lasted a lot longer than people were anticipating. In fact, salt is so important from a historical standpoint that a lot of your historical cities were actually built by readily available sources of salt, because that's what was needed in order to help preserve the food, to be able to make sure that the population was able to be fed during those winter months. Some other interesting tidbits of information. When people would go out hunting, they would take their kill and they would typically hang it off the ground, usually in a tree by the fire. And so what that would do is hanging it off of the ground kept the animals, the predators and those that were looking for a quick meal from getting to it. And it was near the fire because the smoke would help keep the insects from landing on that meat. But what they found is up by the fire and the smoke bathing that meat that was hanging there, it actually darkened, flavored, dried, and actually preserved it. So again, by accident or as a necessity of trying to keep bugs and animals away, they found that by surrounding it with smoke, you could actually increase the shelf life of that meat. We actually have records that date back to 3000 BC with the ancient Sumerians that have records of preserved meats being done even way back then, and probably even earlier than that, but those are the first records that we can date back officially when it comes to different preserved meats. Another big thing, and up until the last century or so, this was a big thing. At the end of the growing season at your grandparents' farm or their garden and stuff, you would take those foods and you would extend the shelf life of them. Cucumbers only last so long, but when you pickle them, they last much longer. You can eat those way later than just fresh pickles. Fresh cucumbers. So things such as pickling, salting foods, brining them, doing cured, dried, packed in fat is another thing we'll talk about in another chapter, and smoked. All of these things with meats and vegetables and fruits and such were able to be done at the end of the growing season in order to extend the shelf life into those winter times when food was more scarce. Of course, you remember back in 150, the talk about the guild system to prevent the monopolies and pricing abuses. There were about 24 guilds that were specifically for food. And, a big part of garde manger, especially the sausage making, the food preservation, those were actually part of the guild system that we see that was established during the Middle Ages. We know, of course, about Monsignor Bollinger and the first tavern and the first restaurant that was done. Again, it all ties back to what we see nowadays, and how this evolution has happened into what we use now within the kitchens, and especially even into the garde manger kitchen. Again, back from 150, we remember the brigade system, I hope, that was put together by Escoffier. And so garde manger was one of those big ones, along with things such as the saucier, the rôtissier, the pâtissier, and of course our cold kitchen, or the garde manger. So today's garde manger really has expanded out. We see preserved and cold foods, appetizers, hors d'oeuvres, salads, sandwiches, cold sauces and condiments all fall within the realm of the garde manger chef. In addition, you've also got pâtés, terrines, sausages, fresh cheese making, and canapes. All are within the garde manger realm that we see right now. Another thing that the garde manger is expanded into is different types of service. So, of course, the a la carte makes sense. So if they are doing the sandwiches or doing the appetizers, canapes, et cetera, that makes a lot of sense. But what we found is the garde manger really morphed into the banquet chef. In the day and age, not that long ago, really, when garde manger was reduced to salad station because we weren't doing a lot of the other stuff in-house, the garde manger chef kind of shifted gears and ended up becoming the banquet chef. And so banquets, receptions, and buffets all became part of the domain of the garde manger chef and the garde manger kitchen, which hopefully you can see with this wide variety is why garde manger is a class in and of itself, because it does span a lot of different areas. They all have a tie-in with, to the cold kitchen in a lot of cases, but that doesn't mean the stuff has to be served cold. But, the banquets and the a la carte all have a place now within the garde manger kitchen. Some of the tools of the trade. Some of these are fairly straightforward, your slicers, your mixers, your thermometers, but you get into, your grinders for grinding up meat into sausages and patties and stuff like that. Of course, blenders, food processors, your smokers for preserving meat, your sausage stuffers for making your own in-house sausages, brining tubs in order to allow the curing process to happen, and even ice carving tools are all part of the garde manger toolkit. In fact, a lot of garde manger chefs, as part of that banquet side, really leaned towards the artistic side, with ice carving as probably one of the most popular mediums when it came to displays and such. There's other ones available as well that we'll talk about down the road, but ice carving was probably the biggest when it came to one of those newer amenities that came from the garde manger kitchen. Switching gears to finish up this chapter, things that we're trying to avoid in our kitchen as far as our time wasters. First, no clear priorities for task. Again, it's one of those when you are doing your mental mise en place, decide, okay, this needs to get done first, then this goes next, and this goes after that, and really work on making sure you have your ducks in a row and that you're able to accomplish the goals that you planned in the most efficient manner possible. As a chef, you need to make sure your staff is properly trained. As your professor, that's my job. You are my staff as the students, and I want to make sure, along with the other chefs here at the college, that you have that training necessary to be productive out in the industry. But when you get into the industry as well, your chef, or you, when you become the chef, are going to be responsible for making sure that your staff is trained to the standards that you expect them to be for the production that you expect them to have. Communication. If you've taken management with me, I beat that thing with it like a dead horse. You need to almost over communicate with your staff to make sure everybody is on the same page. The last thing you need is a miscommunication when it comes to something that is being expected of them. Because if your communication is poor and they don't do it as you expect them to do, well, if you didn't communicate well with them, it does fall back on you. Poor organization kind of goes back to that priorities for tasks, making sure you have those ducks in a row and you are organized. A kitchen should run like a well-oiled machine with all of its parts moving seamlessly. That only comes from organization. Prior planning prevents poor performance. I know there's another P in there, but I think I'll leave that one out. You make sure you're organized as the chef so everything can run as smooth as possible during the actual production time. And then, of course, we want to make sure that we have the appropriate tools to accomplish the task. So if we don't have the right tools or the tools are not adequate for what we need, it slows down production and it does make things more difficult. So when you're in that position of, as a chef running a kitchen, you need to make sure that your staff has the correct tools to make sure they get the job done right. As a professional, you should have an expectation. Of course, I have an expectation of you of a commitment to service. This is why you're here in the hospitality industry. Many of you have probably heard me say this. Your job is to do everything you legally can to make your customer happy. So you need to make sure you have that commitment to service and understand this is why we're here. A sense of responsibility. Remember, take responsibility for your actions, good and bad. Mistakes happen. Own up to it. How do we correct it? And let's move forward. Of course, we want to get to the point where we're not making the same mistakes continually. That's where we've got an issue. But if you make a mistake, be responsible, own up to the mistake. Let's correct the mistake and let's move forward, learn from that, and not make the mistake again. And judgment calls happen all the time in this industry. As a culinarian, you're making a judgment call every time you taste a dish. Does it need more salt, more pepper? Does it need more of this or that? That's a judgment call. When you are designing menus, when you are doing ordering, when you are doing hiring and firing, these are all judgment calls that you're going to have to make as a professional. Remember, in the back of your mind, always be professional about how those are being done. And don't forget the golden rule. Okay? Make sure that you're doing to those that you would want them to do unto you. So have that in the back of your head when you are interacting with everybody. So make sure you're using that good professional judgment. And the cardinal virtues of this profession: have an open and inquiring mind. Try everything. Again, unless you're allergic to it and it's going to make you sick or die, please try it. Even if it's not something that you like, you might be surprised when it's done right, or maybe it's been so long that you forgot how it is and you just had that bad memory. Please try everything. Have that inquiring mind. Look for the why and how, and trying to expand your knowledge as a professional. Have an appreciation of and a dedication to quality wherever it's found. No matter what you are doing, no matter where you're working, I always ask, please give that 110% and making sure you're putting out that quality product. And just like we talked about before, that sense of responsibility, please make sure you're always having it in this industry. Take that responsibility, good or bad, when it comes around, and make sure you're passing that on as well. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me or send me a message. I can happily answer those questions, or if we need to do a Zoom meeting, I'm always more than happy to help you with that as well. Thanks for listening and watching for Chapter 1. Thanks, everyone.